This show is part of OnePlace, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to today's briefing. We are tracking a major shift in the Middle East conflict and the political firestorm surrounding the administration's latest moves. Here's a quick look at the top stories.
Oil prices plummeted following a surprise U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal.
Trump avoids immediate war but faces high diplomatic costs.
Some Republicans break silence to condemn Trump's civilization threats.
The acting AG defends investigating the president's political enemies.
Democrats demand an immediate return to session over war.
Military experts question the feasibility of Trump's infrastructure threats.
Congress remains on recess despite escalating global tensions tonight.
Verified reports show significant damage to Iran's civilian infrastructure.
First, the oil markets. Global markets reacted with a massive sigh of relief today as oil prices took a sharp dive. Benchmark Brent crude fell by about 13%, landing at roughly $94 a barrel, while U.S.-traded oil saw an even steeper drop of over 15%. This volatility comes directly on the heels of the announced two-week conditional ceasefire between the United States and Iran. A critical part of this deal is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway for global energy supplies that Iran had previously threatened to block. While the price drop is significant, it is important to remember that energy costs are still much higher than they were before this conflict ignited in late February. Back then, oil was trading at around $70, so we are still in a high-cost environment.
The stock markets certainly shared in that optimism, with major indices across Europe and Asia posting substantial gains. London's FTSE 100 jumped over 2%, while markets in Germany and South Korea saw even more dramatic rises of up to 6%. This rally was fueled by President Trump's social media announcement that he would suspend bombing for 2 weeks, provided Iran ensures the complete and safe opening of the strait. Market analysts like Xavier Smith from AlphaSense suggest that Trump was likely wary of the economic fallout from skyrocketing energy prices. An escalation could have resulted in a self-inflicted economic wound that would be disastrous for his approval ratings. For now, the ceasefire offers a temporary reprieve for stranded oil tankers and a nervous global economy, though the long-term stability of the region remains very much in question.
Next, the diplomatic cost. President Trump's decision to agree to this two-week ceasefire came just hours before his own self-imposed deadline. He had previously threatened that a whole civilization would die if a deal wasn't reached by Tuesday night. This agreement allows him to step back from a potentially catastrophic escalation without appearing to fully retreat from his hardline stance. However, the cost of this brinkmanship is high. By making such inflammatory and unprecedented threats, Trump has fundamentally altered how the international community views American leadership. The U.S., once seen as a stabilizing force, is now perceived by many as a source of unpredictability that shakes the very foundations of the global order. While the immediate threat of massive strikes against Iranian infrastructure has been paused, the underlying tensions and the damage to diplomatic norms are likely to persist long after this two-week window.
The next 14 days will be a critical testing ground for both nations as they attempt to negotiate a more permanent settlement. While oil prices dropping below the $100 mark suggests market confidence, the path forward is expected to be incredibly bumpy. Iran continues to insist on its dominion over the Strait of Hormuz, even as it agrees to safe passage for commercial ships. This ceasefire might only be a temporary pause in a much larger conflict. Trump's rhetoric, including his suggestion that he would destroy Iranian civilization so it could never be brought back, has set a tone that makes traditional diplomacy nearly impossible. Even if a permanent peace is reached, the world has seen a U.S. president willing to use the threat of total annihilation as a negotiating tactic, a move that will have lasting implications for international relations and American credibility.
Now, the Republican response. In Washington, we are starting to see the first real signs of dissent within the Republican Party regarding the president's rhetoric. While many top leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune have remained silent, a few individual lawmakers are speaking out. Representative Nathaniel Moran of Texas was among the first to draw a hard line, stating that while he supports lawful military actions, he cannot support the destruction of an entire civilization. He emphasized that such a threat is inconsistent with the principles that have guided America for centuries. This is a notable shift, as it moves the criticism beyond the usual libertarian-leaning skeptics of foreign intervention and into the mainstream of the party. These lawmakers are clearly uncomfortable with the idea of the U.S. being associated with threats that many are calling genocidal in nature.
Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska also issued a sharp rebuke, rejecting the idea that such extreme language can be dismissed as a mere negotiating tactic. She argued that threatening the death of a civilization is an affront to the ideals of freedom that the United States has promoted for nearly 250 years. Murkowski warned that this type of rhetoric actually endangers Americans both at home and abroad by undermining our global standing. Even Kevin Kiley, an independent who often aligns with Republicans, flatly rejected the president's words, stating that the United States simply does not destroy civilizations. This internal friction highlights a growing concern that Trump's approach is not just unconventional, but fundamentally at odds with American values. As the ceasefire proceeds, the pressure on Republican leadership to either defend or distance themselves from these statements is only going to increase.
Moving to the DOJ, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has made waves by defending the president's right to investigate his political enemies. In his first public comments since taking the role, Blanche argued that it is not only the president's right, but his duty to lead the country by ensuring that individuals he perceives as foes are investigated using all available resources. He dismissed concerns about the weaponization of the Justice Department, calling such reports completely false. Instead, he portrayed Donald Trump as a victim of the previous administration, who is now simply seeking justice. This stance is a direct challenge to the long-standing norm of Department of Justice independence from the White House. Blanche seems unfazed by the pressure, stating that these mandates won't keep him up at night, as long as every case is investigated to the fullest extent of the law.
This defense comes after the sudden firing of former Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was reportedly ousted for not moving quickly enough against Trump's perceived enemies, such as James Comey and Letitia James. When asked about Bondi's departure, Blanche claimed that nobody truly knows why she was removed and that the president has the right to keep those reasons private. Blanche's background as Trump's personal attorney before joining the Justice Department adds another layer of scrutiny to his current role. He insists that he does not spend his time second-guessing the president's thoughts, but his comments suggest a Department of Justice that is becoming more closely aligned with the president's personal and political agenda. This shift is causing significant alarm among legal experts and lawmakers who fear the erosion of the rule of law in favor of executive power.
Next, the Democratic outcry. Congressional Democrats are not holding back in their condemnation of the president's threats against Iran. Despite being on a scheduled recess, more than 36 Democratic lawmakers have already called for Trump's removal from office. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries described the president as completely unhinged, stating that the threat to eradicate an entire civilization shocks the conscience. Jeffries is calling for the House to return to session immediately to vote on ending what he calls a reckless war of choice. The concern among Democrats is that Trump's rhetoric could inadvertently plunge the United States into a third world war. They are pushing for a decisive congressional response to check the president's power before the 2-week ceasefire expires, and the situation potentially escalates again. This sense of urgency is palpable as they try to mobilize from their home districts.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer joined the chorus of criticism, calling the president's behavior extremely sick, and warning that any Republican who remains silent will own the consequences of this conflict. In response, the Senate Republicans' social media account fired back, reminding the public that the Iranian regime is a major state sponsor of terrorism responsible for American deaths. This partisan divide is deepening as the conflict continues. While Trump's latest social media posts suggest he is open to a revolutionarily wonderful change in Iran, his ultimatum and subsequent threats have left little room for middle ground. Democrats are framing this as a moment of historical importance, arguing that 47 years of complex history with Iran cannot be resolved through threats of total destruction. The political battle in Washington is becoming just as intense as the military standoff in the Persian Gulf.
Now, the military reality. While the president's threats were bold, military experts are questioning whether the U.S. could actually carry them out as described. Trump vowed to destroy every bridge and power station in Iran within just 4 hours, but analysts told the BBC that such a feat is practically impossible in one fell swoop. Iran is a massive country, roughly 1/3 the size of the continental United States. While the U.S. military certainly knows the locations of major nuclear sites and key infrastructure, identifying and destroying thousands of smaller targets like every single bridge across such a vast territory in a few hours is a Herculean task. Experts suggest that Trump may be struggling to find new levels of verbal threats to move the strategic needle, even if those threats aren't entirely grounded in the reality of military logistics and capabilities.
There is also the serious concern of international law, targeting purely civilian infrastructure like power plants and bridges could be classified as a war crime. Some legal experts have even suggested that the threat to wipe out an entire civilization could be seen as inciting genocide. Beyond the legal and moral implications, there is the question of strategic effectiveness. Former defense officials warn that even a large-scale attack on Iran's power sector might not force the regime to agree to a permanent ceasefire. While striking refineries in coastal provinces like Bushehr and Khuzestan would deal a significant blow to the Iranian economy, it might also harden the regime's resolve and lead to further regional instability. The gap between the president's rhetoric and the actual feasibility of his threats creates a dangerous uncertainty for both U.S. allies and adversaries.
Next, the congressional vacuum. As the threat of civilizational destruction loomed, the branch of government responsible for declaring war was notably absent. Congress is currently on a 2-week Easter recess, leaving Washington largely empty during one of the most tense periods in recent history. There hasn't been a single hearing on the war, despite the fact that it has already claimed the lives of thousands, including over a dozen U.S. service members. Republican leaders have largely avoided commenting on the president's most extreme statements, with many lawmakers remaining in their home districts. This lack of oversight is drawing sharp criticism from those who believe Congress should be playing a more active role in restraining executive action. Representative Gil Cisneros, a Navy veteran, argued that Congress should invoke the War Powers Resolution to end what he calls a war of choice, that is making the U.S. look like the bad guy.
The silence from Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been particularly conspicuous. While House Democrats are demanding an immediate return to session, Republicans seem content to wait until the recess ends next week. This delay means that any legislative attempt to curb the president's authority or provide formal oversight is on hold while the 2-week ceasefire clock ticks down. Some progressive Democrats are even suggesting more drastic measures, like invoking the 25th Amendment, arguing that the president's rhetoric shows he is unable to discharge his duties. However, without a functioning Congress in session, these calls remain largely symbolic. The situation highlights a significant tension in the American system of checks and balances, where the executive can make world-altering threats while the legislative branch is effectively on vacation, leaving a vacuum of leadership at a critical moment.
Finally, the infrastructure damage. While the ceasefire is now in place, the damage already done to Iran's infrastructure is substantial. BBC Verify has confirmed that recent U.S. and Israeli strikes have targeted critical civilian sites, including steel plants, bridges, and even a pharmaceutical facility. One notable strike hit a bridge under construction in Karaj, killing at least 13 people. President Trump actually shared footage of this attack online, boasting that the biggest bridge in Iran had come tumbling down. These strikes have a direct impact on the lives of ordinary Iranians, with schools and hospitals also reportedly damaged in the crossfire. The targeting of these facilities is a key part of the administration's strategy to pressure the Iranian regime by crippling its economy and internal stability. However, this approach has drawn warnings from UN officials who say these actions could constitute war crimes, a concern Trump has dismissed.
The economic impact of these strikes is becoming clearer as well. Major steel manufacturers, like the Isfahan Mobarakeh Steel Company, have been forced to suspend operations after being hit. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims that up to 70% of Iran's steel manufacturing capability has been disrupted. Since steel is a cornerstone of Iran's non-oil economy, this damage could have long-lasting effects on the country's ability to function. Satellite imagery has confirmed significant damage at multiple sites, and local officials say it could take over a year to repair some of the plants. As the 2-week ceasefire begins, the Iranian people are left dealing with the aftermath of these attacks, which have targeted the very infrastructure they rely on for daily life. The question now is whether this physical destruction will lead to the diplomatic breakthrough the president is demanding, or simply fuel more resentment.
That wraps up our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us for this look at the shifting landscape in the Middle East and the political fallout at home.
Be sure to follow us for the next daily briefing as we continue to track these developing stories. We will see you back here tomorrow.